Welcome to the Last of Us podcast on TV Podcast Industries. We're talking about The Last of Us, episode 1, When You're Lost in the Darkness.
The guys who jumped me were with Robert. He sold our battery to someone else.
Nothing's lost. This is gonna happen. Now we just shake it off, and we go get our cards back, or the battery.
I need the battery, Tess.
Truck's no good without one, and if I don't get to Tommy soon, he's gonna die out there.
Okay, we get our money back and the battery of it, Joel. Listen, Robert is terrified of you. So you march out of here all Clint Eastwood. He's gonna get wind of it and skip. I need you to take a breath.
Welcome, fellow survivors, to the Last of Us podcast from TV Podcast Industries, our 737th episode of TV Podcast Industries. This time, we're starting a new show. We're starting The Last of Us. We're talking about episode 1, When You're Lost in the Darkness. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
Hello there, fellow survivors. I am one of your other hosts, John.
And rounding out this trio of survivors, I am Chris.
The only reason I called out the number of the episode was because I thought it was quite ironic that this is episode 737 and we saw a plane crash in this episode. So I don't normally call out the number.
We saw one plane crash, but multiple going down.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
Yes, we did.
That's like you're not just sitting under an overpass just before the runway. No. That is like, oh no, there's houses then villages down there. They're going down.
Yeah, absolutely,
Definitely.
Absolutely. Well, we are going to be talking about our spoiler-filled thoughts about the first episode of The Last of Us, a series that we've been very excited about since it was first announced. I think it was on the top of our list of anticipated shows for this year as well, or at least very high up there. So really excited to talk about it. If you haven't seen the show, make sure you do watch the episode because firstly, it's well worth watching, but we will be spoiling everything about the episode, as we always do here in TV Podcast Industries. But we do want to hear your thoughts as the series goes on. Make sure you contact us by emailing us at feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com, or you can go over to our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/TV Podcast Industries. I have a spoiler post up there for each of the episodes as they're released, and you can share your spoiler-filled thoughts there, and we'll discuss them on the podcast. We will also be kicking off our World's End pub quiz for The Last of Us later in this episode. We'll give you a question on each podcast about each episode. All you need to do is gather together the 9 answers at the end of the season and email us to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com with all 9 of the answers for that. And we have a special prize at the end of the season. We'll be giving away The Last of Us Part 1, the remake, on PlayStation 5 or PC, depending on which one you want to play it on.
Whoop 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 whoop.
Yeah, it's a big prize.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're actually holding back the PC version of The Last of Us game until the series finishes, because the series apparently cleaves quite closely to the story, so they obviously think that people will want to play through the story after the series finishes, which I think is quite cool. For an extra chance to get your hands on that, you can also rate us on Apple Podcasts. Send us an email with the details, just take a photograph of it, really easy to do, and email us to that email address, and you can get an extra entry into our draw for The Last of Us Part 1.
And if you want to be really nice, why not head over to Spotify and leave us a rating and a review there as well, because every bit of exposure helps with a little fledgling podcast like ourselves. You know, we've only been around for 737 episodes.
We certainly have.
Exactly.
We're still so young. The grey is just put in our beard for effect.
Yes. Luckily, it's not a video show that we do, because you'd see that all the time. We all look a little bit like Joel, I think, in this episode. But if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, as Chris mentioned, we do have 737 episodes, loads of shows that we've covered. You can subscribe to the podcast by looking for TV Podcast Industries wherever you get your podcasts, or popping over to tvpodcastindustries.com. Loads of options there to subscribe to the podcast. Without further ado, I think we need to get into the details of the episode.
Yes, Derek. Shout them out.
Who gave us what?
The Last of Us is based on the 2013 PlayStation game by Neil Druckmann from game publisher Naughty Dog. The show is written and executive produced by Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann, and this first episode written for television by Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann, episode directed by Craig Mazin. Craig Mazin is a really interesting guy. He did the wonderful show Chernobyl, brilliant one-season show on HBO as well, so go check that out if you're interested in his vision for this show. Neil Druckmann being the game's creator coming on board and the two of them working together and breaking this story and creating the story for HBO is a really interesting connection between the two of them. Craig Mazin, also a very well-known podcaster. He's been podcasting for many, many years, but most recently he's done the official Chernobyl podcast after his show each week. He did the official Watchmen podcast as well for HBO, and now he's a major guest on the regular official podcast for The Last of Us, which is available every week as the episodes air. Well worth listening to. He's a really interesting guy. Tells loads of details behind each of those shows as well. So yeah, definitely well worth checking out. So excited to see what they bring us throughout this season. And
I
John.
don't like this. I don't like these really creative people coming in here taking our jobs. No. They stay in their lane. They stay making the stuff. We talk about the stuff. They can't cross-pollinate. They're going to take our
Absolutely.
audience.
These multitaskers. But after you've listened to Craig Mazin on his podcast, or on the official Last of Us podcast, of course, come over for more humbler thoughts on the show.
Get the
from
Irish,
the common man, from Ireland, for sure.
Get the Irish viewpoint on The Last of Us. Yes. And John, do you want to tell us what they gave us with your synopsis for The Last of Us, episode 1, When You're Lost in the Darkness?
Sure. In 2003, Joel Miller's birthday with his daughter Sarah is turned into a nightmare as a fungal pandemic hits their hometown of Austin, Texas, turning its victims into bloodthirsty attackers. As the fungus starts to spread, Sarah, Joel, and his brother Tommy flee into the chaos, leading to dire consequences. After escaping an infected runner, Sarah is killed by a soldier who shoots her, believing her and Joel to be infected. As the soldier goes to finish off Joel, he is saved by Tommy. 20 years later, after the planet has been ravaged by the fungal outbreak, life is harsh and desolate for the survivors in this new world. Joel lives in the Boston quarantine zone managed by the Federal Disaster Response Agency, or FEDRA, as a smuggler with his partner Tess. Confined within the walls of the quarantine zone and subject to martial law, they try to source a car battery to leave the city in search of Tommy, who has dropped out of contact from his location in Wyoming. But the local dealer, Robert, has instead sold the battery to the Fireflies, a rebel group that opposes FEDRA. Joel and Tess head to confront Robert. As the Fireflies leader in Boston, Marlene, begins to enact a new mission to move a valuable asset, a young girl named Ellie from Boston, her attempts to secure transport out of the city with Robert goes awry, and she is injured in a shootout. Arriving at the Fireflies' headquarters, a wounded Marlene pleads with Joel and Tess to take young Ellie to the Massachusetts State House. Reluctantly, Joel and Tess accept the additional burden to their plans in exchange for supplies and a fully gassed-up working vehicle. Sneaking past the heavy FEDRA security through no man's land, the group of 3 are caught by a soldier. He tests each of them for infection, but when Ellie stabs him, he tries to shoot her. With flashes to the death of his daughter, Joel protects Ellie, tackling the soldier to the ground and beating him to death. In the violent aftermath, Tess realizes Ellie is infected. While Ellie promises them that she will not turn, there is little time to debate the situation, as they make a break from pursuing FEDRA soldiers into a biological contamination area. Little do they realize that their new mission could change everything. In Joel's empty apartment back in the quarantine zone, a song plays on the radio, an 80s coded message of impending trouble.
Excellent. A synopsis spanning around 50 years.
Exactly. A tour through the decades. Exactly.
And not the full 120 minutes of the episode. But close.
What we normally do here on TV Podcast Industries is we talk about our major points, the things we thought stood out to us about the episode. What I kind of want to kick off at the start of this episode is literally the opening that we have in 1968 here with Dr. Newman and Dr. Schonhaus talking about the idea of an outbreak. For the narrative structure of this TV show, opening with this moment where we have this almost sterile talk show where we have 2 scientists talking about the possibility of what could happen. I thought this was a great idea to establish the world, set it up, and talk about the fears that play into the whole the whole society, set up the horror of what's going on, really. What I thought was really interesting, if you listen to what Dr. Shunhouse says, he's using terms that we're all now fully aware of. He is literally talking about the global pandemic. He has to explain the word pandemic, which I find hilarious after 3 years of dealing with COVID. But he's literally talking about the process by which it gets transported around the world by airplane. People traveling means that a pandemic can overtake the world. And the other doctor, Dr. Newman, played by John Hannah, actually, he calls out that, yeah, you may think that's bad, but wait till you hear about the fungal virus that's also a possibility for this world. What did you guys think of this as this opening for the episode?
I absolutely love this opening. I thought it was really, really nice touch and, a departure from the game. And I have to just question, I think I might be referring to the game quite a bit.
Okay.
It is my touch point. So, but I loved it. I love this opening with the scientists, and it was just that. It was also the reaction of the audience and the host to John Hannah, just talking about something that, as the other scientist would have it, is not on his radar at all. This idea that if fungus adapts and, the microfungus, if it starts to adapt and what it could potentially be capable of, in terms of how it operates in other parts of, the animal kingdom, like with the ants, the example of the ants and it being taken over, zombie ants, I think they're called, once they're infected with the cordyceps. So I really kind of like that. It really just gave a nice opener to this. Almost a, the warning of impending doom, but also now using that language with, as you say, with pandemics, viruses, influenza type, respiratory, symptoms that we're all very familiar with. So it's a really nice way of hooking in that apprehension about, I guess, how things can evolve and develop just generally.
Exactly.
So I thought this was really good.
Yeah. For me, it's the opening is twofold. This one is kind of like, hey, you remember, just let's all talk the same language. But additionally, it's beyond that, because you could say in pop culture, now I know with some of the my other podcast hosts love a certain zombie dead or mobile dead TV show that is.
We can say The Walking Dead, Chris. We can say The Walking Dead. Yes.
Yes, you love The Walking Dead.
Absolutely.
But you could say that zombie horror or shows, movies in pop culture have kind of been done. And they've been done a lot in like the Fear the Walking Dead, the other one, another spin-off, as well as beyond that, like all the films, Army of Dead and all those.
And the 5 other TV shows that are out there, Dawn of the Dead and Black Summer, I think is another one as well. Yeah.
There's just loads. So what I think also this worked at doing is going, look, this isn't your standard zombie. This isn't your standard outbreak apocalypse. What we're talking about here is fungus.
Yeah.
You haven't seen that before, have you?
Exactly.
No.
And really interestingly, that was kind of the situation that the game came out in back in 2013 when it came out. Pretty much every video game was doing a zombie version of their game where you went out and they put zombies in as the enemies and you shot them, and that was kind of the function of it. And what Last of Us was trying to say was, we can also do really interesting stories in a post-apocalyptic world. And they're kind of like zombies, but they're not really. And I'm sure we'll talk about that as the series goes on as well.
I think the important thing here, or the important distinction, is that they are infected.
Yes.
In the same way as viral or bacterial, there is an infection. It's just this is fungus. And yes, I reference zombie ants, but it is to that point that they keep their host alive. Zombies are dead, and it is, referenced through the game, but also in this episode about, do you think that they're still alive in there, that they're still that person?
Yeah.
Because and they're being controlled. I mean, as John Hannah's character says, it's the puppeteer with the marionette.
Yes.
So it is that kind of, you could arguably say they may have some form of knowledge or memory of their life, certainly in the earlier stages of that infection. So it's to that. I always remember the whole thing around 28 days later around, are they zombies or are they infected?
They're runners.
Yeah, exactly. So, and well, in fact, that first stage, that very early stage of infection in Last of Us, they are called runners. They're known as runners. They have much more mobility as the fungal infection is kind of smaller within the body, I guess, targeted more at the brain, so that the fungus controls the host. So
the recently infected.
So that's that other side of it as well. So I would always say they're not zombies here. It's not a zombie apocalypse in a sense. You could argue it's more akin to something like Outbreak or, that pandemic disaster movie in a sense.
Yeah, and I know there are loads of arguments out there and have been for many years as to what is a zombie and whether these are zombies or not. I think what happens in zombie fiction a lot of the time, you don't get an explanation for where it comes from and they try to hide it. Like Walking Dead never gave an explanation for where the zombies came from. That was one of the things Robert Kirkman sat on forever, didn't want to ever talk about it. He just wanted to talk about what is the zombie apocalypse effectively. Whereas here we're starting it out with, in the opening shots, this is where it's coming from. So it is an infection. I just had a couple of quick final points about this opening as well. I love that it takes place in 1968 because that means people have known about it for decades beforehand, right? Even though John Hannah's saying, we don't think there's any possibility of a cure. And the other scientist is going, I don't believe in the theory that it can jump from the animal kingdom into humans. But John Hannah's saying, well, what if the temperature goes up? So that's the warning of the climate crisis that we're in now, effectively. So that's real world situations. That's exactly what happens. People were aware of what was going to happen back in the 60s and 70s. Loads of information has come out about that quite recently as well. But I love that they've set all of that up within this scientific environment. It really felt like Frost Nixon, the old David Frost show where he's interviewing people that we don't tend to see interviewed on TV anymore in big situations. We normally get, stars and actors and singers and stuff like that interviewed in this kind of situation. But in the 60s, lots of shows were like this.
Well, and weirdly, through my day-to-day job, I'm aware of research being done on beneficial forms of fungus that in soil and how they respond to higher soil temperatures. And in fact, when there's been a fire, as to whether they're killed off and how they respond and come back to higher temperatures. So I was kind of, as soon as he started to talk about that and how it affects that community of different fungal species. So I was like, as soon as I heard that, I was like going, oh crap. Yes. That's being done around soil fungal populations.
Yeah.
So you were that meme out of what was it, Leonardo DiCaprio sitting on the chair with the kind of cigar and the bottle of pointing at the TV. Like, oh my god, yeah, I know that.
No, it was just more, it was just more going, that's weird, because they're actually looking at that in terms of how soil fertility and those populations that are good for soil in terms of the fungus respond to effectively climate change and to fire hazards and temperature. So I thought, oh crap.
Yeah.
Watching out for that fungus.
But I do really like this as an opening. I think it's a great idea to establish it the way that they have before we get into meeting our characters for the show. But again, I love set back in 1968. So decades and decades beforehand, there was a warning out there.
Yeah.
I would argue though with the scientists, and I'm not a scientist myself. John, you are officially Dr. John Harrison, an actual scientist. But I would argue with the scientist there. One's arguing that the fungus can mutate and take over humans, and then says there's no cure for it. And I was kind of going, yeah, but surely humans can develop to defend against fungal infections like we do with other fungal infections, right? But he's kind of going, there's no cure for it. That's it. That's the end of the world for all of us.
Well, he's talking back in 1968. all I'm going to say is when I got a fungal infection of the mouth after taking sort of the inhalation steroid for a lung infection, and because it was steroidal, I got a fungal infection in the mouth. I mean, the treatment for it was horrendous.
Yes.
And I mean, it wasn't a pill. You had to put on effectively a fungicide in your mouth.
Yeah.
So yes,
Ooh, tasty.
You have well, it was a mint fungicide.
Cool mint flavored.
I mean,
he's been eating it ever since.
I guess they are problematic even for like sort of pesticides to take out fungus, and they're normally much simpler fungus. You're actually using a pesticide in a pharmaceutical treatment to get rid of it, and it's like. And and the side effects that are listed there, I'm kind of like, that's great.
I remember reading those. Yes, awful, but again, absolutely zero possibility of a cure. I thought that was very defeatist.
Back then, they never had athlete's foot, all right?
Yeah. Back then, they were smoking on television the whole way through, right?
I know, that was so great.
So nice to see, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Back in the days. Right, let's go on to our major points. I think, John, you're going to kick us off with your major point for the episode.
Yeah, I am. I think, for me, dare I say it, I'm going to take the whole of 2003, if that's possible. But, I mean, not really in the sense. That second kind of
we'll jump in
part, we've talked about kind of the prologue here, that setup of what the danger, what the threat is. I think for me, it's that end of the world. Some people may call it a trope. I'm not saying that that's a negative word. It's just that any good apocalyptic show having that contrast of normal life and then how it all breaks down, even if it is accelerated for, dramatic purposes, is really, really kind of good. And I thought in this sort of section of the episode in 2003, you have all this normal goings on. You have Joel's birthday. And I just love that the normalcy of the interaction between him and his daughter Sarah, and also then with his brother, even that interaction with the neighbors next door as they're walking out with the Adlers, who will play a significant part in their future life.
They will.
About effectively Sarah trying to get Joel to take some of their biscuits, as he's like literally poking bits of biscuit into his mother's mouth, the elderly mother. And then sort of, I'm on Atkins, but Sarah, she will spend, a good few hours with you when she comes back, see how you're doing and so on. Yeah. So I love that kind of interaction, that kind of the normalcy of it. But then, in the background, those subtle and, as normal, not so subtle cues that there is something bad happening. So, whether it's the shop owners where Sarah goes to get Joel's watch fixed, who suddenly quickly close up the repair shop because, either the radio or the TV is going on and talking about some of the events that are happening. We hear about Jakarta in Indonesia.
Yes, we do. Yes.
And so on. And the emergency vehicles whizzing past, but
just really quickly, you mentioned Jakarta. I love that Joel's reaction was most people's reaction at the start of COVID. Oh, sure, it's over in China. Sure, that's miles away. Oh, sure, it's over in France. Sure, that's ages away. It was very much, where's even Jakarta? Sure, there's nothing that could connect to us over here in the US from that.
Exactly. So, those kind of normal threads, but it was the subtle ones here. I mean, it was Sarah in school where you see the light just reflecting on her face. And she looks over and you see a girl with her hands sort of shaking and so on, which you then later see as one of the potential symptoms of this. And the moment where she's back at the Adlers looking through their DVD collection to get something for Joel, a movie, one of Joel's favorite movies to play for his birthday when he gets home. And you just see Granny Adler convulsing in the background in soft focus.
So good.
Was just fantastic for me. I thought this was really creepy. And in terms of how Granny Adler develops over the course of the next sort of few hours, I think it was also just the mouth opening. And of course it was all blurry. It was just really well done. And then when Sarah goes to leave, she's just kind of almost normal again. She's just sat there like she had been when she arrived. Except for Mercy the dog, who, shout out, the acting chops on that dog. What do they say? Never work with children children or animals. Well, I think Mercy the dog was just brilliant. I loved as it all begins to kick off, where he's scraping at the window. He's whining at Sarah and, really anxious, and then barks at her as she kind of moves away from him. It was just...
I love that. He's basically knocking on the window going, get out here, let me in. She comes out and then tries to go over to the next door. And the minute she tries, Mercy just stops dead in his tracks. And it's like, I'm not going anywhere near that place. No chance.
Digging the old paws in and finally running off. So, it was just really, it felt really realistic, and so well done. So hats off to Mercy the dog.
Absolutely.
Sure.
I love that touch. It's been said many times that animals are much more perceptive than humans about certain things, particularly health related. There's known instances where dogs and cats have picked up on people who have cancer before the patient knows it themselves, that they'll sit with their owners. So having that moment when Mercy realizes that something's going wrong with Nana and is just sitting there staring, and the face of the dog is going, what the hell is going on here? I love how it's captured, because it is really that shocked face of the dog watching on, wondering what's happening,
It really is. Yeah. So, in a story about the apocalypse, how the world ends is really important. Yes. And I loved the subtle nods here, primarily, with Granny Adler, and Mercy the dog, but also with that
kid in
just
school,
the little kid in school shaking. And you hear a cough as well, so again, just immediately in this day and age with the pandemic, with COVID, that whole coughing or sneezing suddenly became a very different thing when you're on, say, a bus or a train or whatever. So I really like those touch points. I thought they were really perceptive of showing, this oncoming outbreak of this fungal infection. And then you really go chaotic finally when Granny Adler has a few mushrooms coming out of her mouth, which I absolutely thought was superb. Yeah, well, exactly. You have to
fry them up in a bit of butter and some chives.
Oh, well, if you can catch her, Chris.
You've got to kill her first. Yeah. But even Joel killing her with the wrench to her head, in front of Sarah, just really, that shock for his child seeing her father do that. And again, it's to that whole point that, it's not just the end of the world as we know it collectively. It became, for other reasons, the end of Joel's world as well, because of that, but personally, with what happens to Sarah. And, I guess that end of the world ratchets up as they get into the car. And, it's something that's very reminiscent of the game as well.
Yeah. Yeah. What did you think about the build up here, Chris, in these moments with the neighbors and all that kind of stuff?
Loved it. For me, it was everything not being the focus of these first 20 minutes or so. Everything slightly in the background, or a subtle nod, or just because I end up having to, because for our people who are joining us for the first ever time, we usually watch the episodes multiple times, at least twice at a minimum, just to kind of make sure we didn't miss anything kind of dramatic. And actually, I missed the watch thing. I thought it was just kind of a girl shaking kind of her thing to annoy Sarah.
Right.
And then watching it the second time, and it's the beginning of the infection. Caught you. Now I got it even better. And then it was just kind of more and more and more. And over that course of time, I'm like, this is why I've always enjoyed Craig Mason's stuff, but beyond that, kind of the story of kind of this opening story within the game, because it was always more focused on the people, the character, than what's going on. Yeah. And I know you could say a lot of films make that argument. We're focused on the character, not the zombie apocalypse or the apocalypse. Everyone makes that, and that's usually very true in their own thing. But Craig Mason very much did focus. Literally, he focused on the characters. Like, everything was in there to focus in the background. Yeah. Until literally it begins. Yeah. And then it's almost a shot for shot. Like, from the point where they get in that car.
Yeah, and even before that, the conversations that are going on between Joel and his daughter Sarah, and we get a bit more Tommy here than we got in the game, but the kind of relationship that you see between these characters is directly lifted from the game. There's specific lines of dialogue between the two of them about the fact that Sarah was able to pay for the watch, and then she says she's selling hardcore drugs. That's all taken from that opening conversation between those two characters, but established really well. And I think that's one of the things that benefits them. What they're kind of saying in this opening sequence, even with the expansion and the extra characters that are in there, what they're saying is, you're in safe hands here. We know how to do character drama really well, and we know how to set up our characters really well, because you are with them before the world falls apart and everything is crashing down around them. Before that car ride, you're with them. You want these people to survive, and you've just seen what's happened to the neighbors next door, the whole family getting taken out by the reanimation, I guess, almost of Nana. One of the things that was really interesting.
Well, exactly. Yeah. As she always said, I've got another 10 years left in me.
Absolutely.
Just with fungus coming out of my mouth.
Yeah. Well, I really like that. You know, there was something on the official podcast where Craig Mazin was talking about this, and he was saying, if you notice the way we layered in Nana throughout the episode, we started out where she isn't able to eat effectively. They're pushing food in her mouth.
Absolutely.
We mention a line from her daughter who's taking care of her going, I don't know why I even talk to her. She's completely deaf. So all of these things, and she's sitting in the same spot all the time. All of these things are to say to you that there's nothing working for her. And the cordyceps takes over and fixes all the things that are broken in Nana, so she can now run and scream and shout and kill effectively. So that's what the cordyceps is doing to her. It's effectively fixing her from the inside, all the broken pieces of her, but turning her into this monster that wants to go and eat her family.
Yeah, I mean, I think the great thing as well is, you know, you get that sense of the immediate family of Joel and Sarah and with his brother Tommy over that birthday breakfast. Like, the interaction is just fantastic. And, you know, such a short space of time, but you get the sense that these people live together, can riff off one another, love one another, care for one another, as well as when it comes to an extreme situation where Joel is protecting Sarah from Granny Adler. And similarly with Tommy, protecting Joel from the soldier later on. So you know, and even the interactions with them getting into the car, in the morning, and the interactions with the neighbors. So, you know, that whole scene with the Adlers is much more meaningful. It just feels, more emotional, because they aren't just random neighbors that you haven't seen up till this point. You know, Sarah's gone in and has helped bake with the daughter, and you've seen then in the soft focus, you know, that there is danger for that family with the grand turning. So it's that wonderful contrast of ignorant bliss up until the point where it affects you, and you know, even then with the escape from the neighborhood, you know, you get a bit more painting of Joel here, where he basically, you know, tells Tommy not to stop to pick up the family that's stranded by the side of the road.
Damn right.
You know, you see Sarah.
Well, Tommy's saying they've got a kid, and he's like, "Well, I've got a kid. She's right here.
Yeah.
What happens if we stop and we all die because we stopped?" You know, she's the most important thing in his life.
You see the situation of everyone having the same idea, where the motorway is clogged up. You know, that car ride through the alleyways, as I say, you know, just like the game, fantastic. Then that chase and through then that town with all chaos taking place, them getting split up, that escape through the alleyways, and again we see another runner focusing in on Joel, who's having to carry Sarah, and
just that flip of the neck of the runner as it sees its next victim was very, very cool.
That jerky movement, like with Granny Adler as well, where she kind of clicks her head up, but also it's almost, I loved how that runner in the town went after Joel and Sarah, because yes, it's being controlled by this fungus, but it also can't deal with, you know, complex spaces. So just the fact that it's crashing into all the shelving units and so on as it bursts through the door, which gives them a bit more time to escape, but then, you know, quickly picking itself up
as well,
exactly, you know, to ultimately then they're saved by the soldier that then doesn't save them, you know, and the pain of that massive moment with the death of Sarah, which I think Nico Parker, again, that just how she was with a wound, because it felt like agony. Yeah. You know, she didn't, just the response that she did, it felt really real to me. You know, and the response of being sort of pulled up from being flat on the floor, absolute agony. Yeah. And the panic, the distress that she has. And I think that played really well. It must have been really good just to react on that, but from Pedro Pascal as Joel. So I thought it felt really, you know, this big moment, and because, you know, if you haven't played the games, you think you're going to be, and this is where it is, to me, is very different from The Walking Dead. You kind of think that's Rick and Carl, and that's going to be Rick and Carl going through. It's Joel and Sarah. Now, Sarah doesn't survive the first hour of this, and it's not because of the runners. It's because of the people that you think are going to protect you in the form of soldiers ends up effectively following orders blindly, because you can only sense from the, you know, the half conversation that he's having with his superior that, well, they'll be infected. So
he's
just
been told to kill them. Yeah.
Just kill them. The order is to kill them.
Exactly.
And it's really shocking.
Yeah. Yeah. And that it's such an interesting thing. This is, as you say, John, directly taken from the game. They did such an interesting thing here. You're controlling Sarah up until about halfway through this point. You're controlling her in the back of the car, watching all the destruction going on around her. It's only after the car crash that they have that you then control Joel. So you're being put in the shoes of this character, and then she's the one killed at the end of this opening. So what a great narrative choice to do that in the game, and a great, you know, touch to it in the show, because you spend more time with Sarah in the opening than you spend with Joel. So that's the kind of nod to it. I do like that they use the HBO cache to have a crashing plane crashing into the town, causing this big accident that knocks them off the road. Not in the game. It was just a normal car crash. But they were like, hey, we got HBO money. Let's show an actual plane coming down out of the sky at this moment, because it is spectacular. Absolutely great. Yeah.
For me, this just overall, the ending of this opening is still what gets me. I knew what was coming each and every time. I've played the opening of this game multiple times, and we'll get into how much, but I haven't played as much as, I haven't played pretty much, I played a couple of hours of this game multiple times. But this opening I'm well aware of, and I knew what was coming, still gets you right in the feels just each and every time. Like, no one likes to see a kid die.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when you think the kid has survived, because the way the camera pans and everything like that. And then that's what this is for me. Like, I was watching with my wife, and she kind of audibly gasped because she did not think that would happen. Most people, I assume, do not think this is what you're going to happen, because you do think it's going to be, that's the story of Tommy and Joel and Sarah. That's what this story is. We're going to show them into the next 20 years how they're surviving. So I think it's one of those kind of, and anyone who's joining us for the first time, not going to know what I'm meaning, but any of our long-time listeners, they zigged when we thought they would zag.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you're right. No matter how much you know this opening, I think the acting that's there, how it's framed, how it's put together as an opening is still surprising and still delivers the emotion that we all felt when we played the game. Before we move on to the next point, I do want to call that out. There's a great quote from Dara O'Brien, the Irish comedian, about video games as a narrative. And it's the only art form that blocks you from reading the next part of it unless you're good enough, or seeing the next part of it unless you're good enough. You know, you can spend about 60 hours playing The Last of Us. The game is probably 15 hours for some people who are good at it. Other people spend 60 hours over the course of 5 or 6 months, with the story spread out and broken up because they can't get past parts of the game. So it's going to be really interesting watching the rest of the season of this show, having it almost condensed into a 9-hour period over the 9 episodes of the show, because we played the first time over the course of 6 months, myself and John definitely, we did absolutely got to the end and finished it. It's a tough game to get through, but what is rewarding about it when you do get the chance to play the game, if you haven't played the game before, what's rewarding about it is when you die, you only go back a couple of seconds and then you can continue on and continue to try it. So you just have to push through and you will eventually get through it. But you do feel sometimes it's been about 2 or 3 weeks since you've heard any of the storyline when you're playing a video game. Whereas here, we're going to be coming to every week getting the story all laid out, and it's going to be much neater and easier to follow, I think.
Well, that's what I'm really excited about, because if anyone plays games like I do, especially ones with a horror element to it, then after dying about 30 times and taking an hour and a half or 2 hours to get past a particular point, and trying to adapt my strategies as to how I'm going to actually get past this point, just failing miserably. It's almost like the story, because I'm actually just coming down from the high of having gotten past that section. So sometimes the story elements I actually got lost on me. And in a sense, this is condensing it for me, because whereas the game in total would have taken considerably longer than the 9 hours or the 15 hours playthrough for someone who is really good at gaming. This is going to be 9 hours, and it's done in that real life way, in the sense that, if you die, you're going to die.
Yes.
If you progress through, you progress through. So, it is kind of, it's almost condensing the story into, because when I play, it just gets exaggerated out along the timeline of the story by my constant deaths.
Exactly. It's like, why does that matter? Who's that guy again? Especially when you turn it off and play another game for a few months and come back. It's like, how do you control this thing? And how do we move on any further? But anyway, just wanted to mention that there. Chris, do you want to take us on to your major point for the episode?
100%. So I'm going to basically talk about Joel and Tess as the central characters to this show, and that they will be on this, because essentially you're reintroduced to Joel in 2023.
20 years later.
Yeah. And it really is. It shows that the Grey look, well, first of all, it shows Grey looks good on Pedro Pascal, but we knew it would. That was an obvious.
Yeah, but I'll speak for myself. I definitely didn't buy him as a 36-year-old man in 2003 with his daughter. I'm sorry, Pedro. You're a great looking man and you're a great actor, but you do not pass for 36.
No, it was just for men. It was that real, you've literally, they've just gone in and mascaraed over all your actual grey hair.
I think part of the reason they chose not to put him in much of that, of those sequences, is so that they could kind of yeah, we'll age him up in the next scene. Let's not dwell on him too long in these early scenes. But anyway, sorry, Chris.
No, so like for me, I really want to just delve into what they spend the next 40 minutes or so of this, really just reintroducing you to the world of 2023. So it's like, hey, you've seen no one taking a virus serious. You've seen the virus outbreak. We're just skipping ahead. Like, let's just jump to, and they do try and kind of quickly play on your expectations, because you're first introduced to Joel doing a job, like manual labor. Like, that's it. He's just, you basically see him throw the remains of that child who we see shambling into the world. He kind of heartless and just throws the remains in. And you're like, okay, he saw his daughter die. His heart's broken. He's no longer the man he used to be. He's in it for the money. He's your quintessential, kind of tough guy, no emotions.
Yeah, but he's a broken guy, you know?
Yes,
like,
exactly.
It's the fact that the other worker that's there, the woman that's beside him, looks in and sees a child and goes, oh no, I can't possibly do that. And he picks up this child in his arms and carries the boy the same way that he carried Sarah, and then dumps him in the fire. It's exactly the same carrying movement that he does. It's showing this massive transition for this character, the fact that he is completely broken. We mentioned earlier on that the relationship between them was really set in that opening sequence. You could feel how much love he has for his daughter. And this is a completely different human being now. Yeah.
The one thing, there's a lot of this across this episode, where there's one thing or one scene and it's playing two parts. Because, again, that kid, basically, because we just saw the kid before and we saw the kid get the red on the test, that test is then again used later. And it was very cleverly set up and filmed in that order and shown in that it's teaching you in parts, so that by the time you come to the end of this episode, you're like, oh, I understand what that red means everywhere.
And it's a real shorthand as well. That whole scene with the kid on the pure brutality of this world, in the sense of, you know, how even a child is treated in this situation. You know, he's bound to the wheelchair. They do the test. And then, you know, effectively, I'm guessing, as they fill the kid with barbiturates to kill him, effectively assisted death with the injection, you know, there is this almost nod back to the old world, the world that was, which is, you know, this will make you better, this will free you, and you know, that choice of words that the FEDRA soldier uses, and then we'll get you
food. We'll give you all the toys that you want to play with.
It's keeping, it's keeping the kid calm, but it just shows the new reality that these people are being faced with. And then you see it with Joel, and it, you know, it cuts to Joel incinerating people, including this kid, but you realize that, you know, he's, as you say, he's broken. He's cynical. It's sapping. It's like, I mean, to be honest, you know, it's that after 20 years, it's not so much that he's grieving for Sarah still, but that changed his world. As I say, the end of the world, it changed him with the death of Sarah, as well as everything to do with the outbreak and the world that is now, I guess.
Yeah. And it's so very quickly on the kid, it also shows you that just a tiny scrape on the knee.
Yeah.
And that's important. It's the tiniest of infections. Kind of, it's like a big chomp. On Joel, I like that it then starts to show, you think he's just a kind of, he's just your average Joe. He's just working the job. And then it introduces, okay, he's doing it for kind of credits to food and things like that. Essentially, it's the way they earn money. And then going further, over time, over the next bit of time, you're reintroduced. No, he's not. He's a bit of a dirty dealer. He's a smuggler.
Kind of hustler.
And a hustler, and he knows. And it's just that really fun, slow deconstruction of what you think the man is. until you get to the end when you do see the type of man he is, and the pent up rage and the aggression and everything in that when he breaks, essentially.
Yeah.
But you do see all of it where he drinks himself when he thinks when he now thinks he has to go and find Tommy, he drinks himself and medicates himself into a state of slumber.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like when he's waiting in the apartment with Ellie later, he just falls asleep and has PTSD-esque kind of nightmares where he awakens to Ellie essentially saying, "You're still talking and mumbling in your sleep." So you see very much he is that broken man and that character. And a lot of shorthand is taken, but I think it's taken in a very well narrated, they didn't just they didn't have like Basil exposition come on a character and kind of go, "Well, Joel, you're a really broken man, blah, 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 you and your alcoholic problems, blah, blah." Like, they showed it in a clever way versus the more blunt hammer NPC character kind of coming in.
I think as well, though, it is broken, as you say. There's also there's an anger, there's a cynicism, to him as well. I mean, even with Tess saying, "Now take a breath," when she comes back into their apartment all beaten up with the sort of black eye and the cuts, it's like, take a breath. Robert will run a mile, and this battery that you're looking for in order to use for the vehicle to find Tommy, which again is another thing. He potentially is at this moment thinks he's also lost his brother. But she's trying to just calm him down to say, take the breath, don't do anything rash. So there's
because he's an absolute firecracker.
Yeah, exactly.
You can tell he is gonna go off on someone, and she knows how to manage him, which I love. Love Anna Torv here as Tess. I think she's really good. Fringe fans, anybody here?
Yeah, exactly. Just the second I did not know that's who she was playing.
Right.
I knew she was in the show. I did not know, and I was like, perfect casting. No, she is she's going to be the old agent from Fringe by the end of that season. That's her character.
Right.
And they literally might as well just taken her from Fringe into this universe. But there you go, play that character. There you go.
I keep hearing about Mindhunter. I haven't seen Mindhunter, but I hear she's great in that as well.
Oh, I haven't seen that yet.
But I just love how she manages Joel. It's one thing I find interesting about Joel. Joel effectively is Han Solo in this world because he's the smuggler. He's the one that you want, that everybody knows wherever he goes within the quarantine zone. Everybody knows Joel, and everybody knows that Joel is the one that can get them what they need. So he could be a Han Solo character, but because they've layered on all of these elements about his history, that he is fighting his fight to get the best life he possibly can here. Kind of all about himself, but at least with Tess here, he's got a partner who's working alongside him to get what they want, But I kind of like that both of them are navigating a different path within the quarantine zone. There's lots of people who are sitting on the street. There's lots of people who are doing very menial tasks for very low reward, and the two of them are kind of working the system and smuggling things. So I love that about the two of those characters.
Well, it's even he skips the entire queue for the telegraph messages or the radio messages that have been sent out by the guy in order to, again, check in to see whether Tommy has, made contact again. And again, using the cigarettes that he's just had bartered with for the pills.
Now, I thought that was quite a large payment. I'm not sure the barter system, but he was getting like a couple of, he got a pack of about 6 or 7 cigarettes, and he gives the entire pack to the guy for absolutely zero information. I thought that barter system didn't work very well. He handed it over to him, and the guy goes, "I haven't heard anything."
Yeah.
I'm assuming it's more. I'm assuming it's like an ongoing payment because because
Right.
we do learn that the radio station is used for other things as well later.
It's just because the guard handed them over as additional payment because he didn't have enough ration cards. He said he was 5 short on the ration cards. He handed over all this pack of cigarettes, and then Joel takes them out of his pocket and hands them over. We know Joel's not a smoker because we saw him give out to Tommy in the opening part of the season of the episode for smoking in the car. So I just thought it was odd that he took that and transferred it over for, and the response was, guy lights up a cigarette and goes, nope, no information for you.
Well, yeah.
But hey, that's probably why he gets to the head of the queue, I guess, every time, right?
Well, that's what I mean. He's resourceful.
Mm-hmm.
He's thinking those steps ahead in the sense that he probably, when he saw there was a credit or a food stamp or whatever was paid to him for those pills by the soldier, he realized, well, I don't smoke, but I can still use these, to navigate my way, get stuff, and keep my, I guess my in there.
Mm-hmm.
So I really enjoy that element of Joel. At the same time, he has this hard, brash edge to him that also doesn't make him entirely likable. And I have to say, you see a lot of graffiti around the quarantine zone. It says, when you're lost in the darkness, look for the light. And just the guy that comes up to him and says, are you lost? And he says, if you tell me to look at the light, I'll break your effing jaw. Mm-hmm. Which I thought was really, I just really liked that. And, again, he's not shy at coming forward to say, I'll beat you up.
And and the key thing is, that's why he's chosen. Mm-hmm. So, well, aside from convenience of they arrive, but because of all these factors, when him and Tess do go and to get their battery back, and they find Marlene and Ellie and a lot of dead people, that is why Marlene turns around and goes, I know you can do what I need you to do.
Yeah.
Like, you two are known. You're quantity, you're good at what you do, you're going to get the job done because and you're going to do it right, and you're going to do what I ask you because we're going to pay you.
Yeah.
It's, again, they've used a lot of visual narrative shorthands to build and layer that character very well, not quickly. Like, again, we're near like an hour 15, an hour 10, an hour 5 at this point. By the time you're introduced, we were introduced to Ellie a lot earlier, but you're introduced to like the plot point.
Yeah.
Which is they need to get this girl out to these other people.
Yeah, I love that the plot point actually for the show is that Joel needs to get to his brother in Wyoming and he's willing to do whatever is necessary to get there. And that happens to incorporate getting Ellie to this location, which we'll talk about in a second. The one thing I just wanted to quickly point out, I had to look it up because I'm not hugely familiar with the geography of America. I know bits about it, but you mentioned Joel drinking himself into sleep effectively after looking at the maps for his trip to Wyoming from Boston. It's 2,000 miles. Yeah. So I think the reason why he was lashing back so much of the whiskey was like 2,000 miles across all the dead zones with all these people that could kill me. I don't want to do that, but I think that's part of that.
Well, it did. Do you also think it took him 20 years to get from Austin, Texas to Boston? To Boston.
Well, exactly. Yeah, he's been here a while. You can tell he knows this city of Boston pretty well. Yeah.
No, he arrived yesterday. He's just Joel. He's known throughout the landscape.
Exactly.
No, I just look, this sets up the characters perfectly because it does give you them and it brings you literally up to them. It tells you how they know these things and where they're going and what the ways. Yeah. And it sets them up perfectly to introduce you then to your 3 traveling companions when they add in Ellie. And I'll throw to you, Derek, now for your point because I know Ellie is kind of connected. So I think that really wraps up the Joel part of a kind of my point. And Tess, I should say. Joel and Tess.
Yeah. Anything else about Joel and Tess before we go on to the end?
Again, I love the interaction between these two, just even where she kind of slides in, behind him in bed, after she's come back from being, held up or locked up for the day, in a FEDRA cell. And just that the next day where, Joel sees that she's beaten up and he goes, "You're lucky you're alive." And she just wryly comes back to him, "We're lucky any of us are alive, given that we've just had a massive, pandemic, and with these fungal monstrosities, sort of clicking and running around, So, I really kind of, enjoyed, just again, their interaction. The dialogue was really efficient, but it layered and added so much to just their relationship, that they get one another, and they kind of, that they complement one another, and that's what I love about their relationship.
Absolutely. Not to again sell the official podcast, but another comment from Craig Mazin that I really liked on this was that scene between Joel and Tess was Anna Torv's first day of filming.
Oh my God.
So she had to do that scene, and apparently afterwards she was going, "Look, it's just first day, Anna. I'll get better as we go on through the film." And he's like, "That's first day, Anna? What am I going to get after a few weeks of her on set if this is the kind of stuff she delivers in that opening scene?" I thought that was fascinating. So yeah, really interesting. Going to enjoy seeing those characters play out as the show goes on. My point, just the one thing I kind of want to cover here is the two big factions that we see in the show. My point for the episode is the Fireflies versus FEDRA. We kind of mentioned it a bit. I just want to kind of bring it together in this final point. FEDRA being in control of the world, the fact that they've got capital punishment here, people who are being hanged, one for leaving the quarantine zone without authorization, another being hanged for coming into the quarantine zone without authorization. They've got a foothold, or the foot on the neck of all of the people in the quarantine zone. If you want to live there, if you want to live in safety, you follow the rules or you die. It's basically where they are. The fact of how brutal they were with the child coming in. FEDRA are in full control here. And what's bred on the other side of that are the Fireflies, the people that are not willing to give over control to FEDRA. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it is the federal, disaster response agency. So I guess it's the semblance of, the former government, the federal authorities. Yeah. So it's interesting that, in this world, there is still that remnant there. I loved that one of the t-shirts of someone within the Boston quarantine zone was from the Al Gore presidential run from 2003. It was a really nice touch. But it's interesting, again, it depending on the kind of apocalyptic scene, does the government or the authorities of the day hang on? And here there is that semblance, like with Why the Last Man. There was still, it was still trucking on, even though there were the organizations, in this case the Fireflies, that are against what they're doing. And they've gone draconian with the martial law. It's the military court for judging crime. It's not a societal court with a jury of your peers, that kind of stuff. So it's really that whole, the way it's gone, it's become, and again, I guess speaking to elements that happened in the pandemic is, after 20 years, how does, if it's a continuous pandemic of 20 years, when does that imposition on freedoms bite? And I guess what this show is saying is that after 20 years, it's become draconian, but also still because of the nature of the threat of the infected. And similarly, there's a great moment where Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies here in Boston, says to one of her kind of lieutenants, well, after 20 years, if a rebellion hasn't done anything, then we're just graffiti paint on the wall with our symbol.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that nice little sort of both sides of that opposing view.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I'm not too sure how accurate Marlene's comment of we've been fighting this for 20 years is, because they haven't been. There's no way they've been fighting for 20 years. I think she just means the outbreak started 20 years ago. There's always been people opposed to the government and the way they've done things. We saw on the first night there were fighter jets flying in overhead. There were helicopters which were carrying people into Austin. So there must have been a big military response to this to begin with. And that's what has taken over. So I do like the idea that we have these, the Fireflies here in Boston, versus FEDRA. I think it's a really interesting idea. And those are the two factions that we will see throughout the show. There's a mention from Marlene that the entirety of the Fireflies are going to be leaving Boston. Immediately that night, they're all going to be leaving to take the package, which is Ellie, as we find out, and they'll be leaving the city. So we will meet Fireflies more. We have mentioned that they are active throughout the rest of the US, fighting back against FEDRA. So that's quite interesting. I think we keep an eye out on those characters. They're going to be people that we meet and have connections to Marlene, I presume, throughout the rest of the show. But they don't seem to be working very well. Either side, actually, don't seem to be working very well. I like, the idea of this martial law that's going on from FEDRA. What's interesting about it is there's no option to opt out of it. Yeah. So I think that's the statement they're also making about hanging those people who don't have an authorization to leave and didn't have an authorization to come in. It's once you're there, you're under their laws, you're under their rules, and if you don't follow them, you're dead. That's it. There's no other option there at all. Joel has found a way around it, and Tess have found their way around it occasionally to get out of the city by bribing people and doing what they do. But that's not the situation for most people there. You just live under that or you die. And the Fireflies are fighting back against that. So I think that's a really interesting dynamic that will play out as the season goes on.
Yeah, definitely.
We also learn about, like, the key thing is, like, so for example, all the orphanages give their kids over to them.
Yes. FEDRA. Yeah, I was going to mention that one, and that's kind of the last piece we need to talk about is Ellie, this major character that's been brought into the show here, played by Bella Ramsey. This is the major other character that you have in the game. We've mentioned it before. Joel and Ellie are the two major characters. So her introduction is really important here for anybody that knows the story. We wanted to know was how she was going to be introduced, what the character is going to be like in the show. There's a couple of extra tweaks in there, a little bit of extra information, that mention of orphanages giving their kids to the FEDRA military schools. In her case, that's what she says because that's what she's heard. But it turns out, for some reason, Marlene is actually the one that handed Ellie over to military school. She's not her mother, as she says, obviously, but she's the one that handed Ellie over to the military school to keep her safe. So there's obviously some other backstory that we're going to learn about Ellie as to why she was put into that situation, I guess. I'm guessing Marlene knew her mother or knew her parents for some reason, rather than her just being turned out from the regular orphan transition over into military school. But Bella Ramsey just does such a great job as Ellie. It's the same intensity that we saw from the character in the games. It's the same antagonistic side that we saw to Ellie in the games. She does like to wind people up when we see the character. She specifically likes needling at Joel. I think she likes to get under his skin, and we see a little touch of that, which I'll talk about in 1 second. But that's the way she starts out here, this moment where she's obviously being tested for weeks and weeks on end. We find out it's because she has been bitten and she hasn't turned. But she is already pissed off about being stuck in this situation, being locked up when she potentially is a survivor of the infection, right? So,
yeah.
But she's met up with Joel and Tess, and now they've been given the task to take her to the Massachusetts State House, which Marlene can no longer do, Kim can no longer do. I love that Kim's fighting with Marlene about the fact that she can be the one to take her. And Marlene goes, you don't even have an ear on your left-hand side. The fight out obviously taking a lot out of the two of them. But yeah, she's kind of pushed around a lot. I think that's one of the things with Ellie, because she's such an important thing. This kid that survived an infection for now 3 weeks, as she says. It's such an important thing for people that they start to look at her as a thing and start to throw her around. And, we need to keep her safe against all odds, even if that's a bad thing for her. Even if we have to lock her down and tie her up and stick her in a room, well, at least she's safe. I think that's what you see with Ellie in this opening part of the episode.
Well, and it's also the fact that, in that initial moment where they meet her, Joel and Tess, it is that she's unwanted luggage. Mm-hmm. She's a burden. Yeah. Even just the fact that she comes out of the room trying to knife Joel, mm-hmm. and he responds accordingly with, pointing the gun at her. I love that moment. Mm-hmm. And Marlene is like, no, point the gun at me, leave her out of it.
Yeah.
But he keeps his foot on the knife so that she can't get it again, and then sort of kicks it away. Like, it was really good little touches.
Absolutely.
Throughout. And I mean, then, that is that contrast. It's to the point where, and as we move through the season, it's this relationship of, Joel and Ellie, because it's a surrogate daughter. Not entirely, but it's completely different to Sarah, but that, it's even to the point in that moment of the flashback where they're in the no man's land that, they've gotten past the main walls, and the FEDRA soldier stops them, tests them, and because Ellie is, the monitor comes up red that she's infected, he's effectively going to put her down, and mm-hmm. kill her. And it's that, that brief moment of Joel's memory of the night with Sarah that makes him sort of act decisively to protect Ellie in this instance, mm-hmm. And effectively really beat this guy to a pulp.
Absolutely.
So it's that, at least in that moment, it's a protectiveness of her that suddenly comes to him. Not necessarily a surrogate daughter. Maybe that's the wrong choice of words, but he becomes protective of her.
Yeah. I think at the moment, I think that's the relationship you want to see develop over the season, certainly. I think at the moment it's an antagonistic relationship, and she is a package and she is a means to an end. If he gets her to the place she needs to go, then Tess and Joel get all supplies they need and get a proper working vehicle that can take them all those 2,000 miles to Wyoming to get Tommy. That's his impetus here.
Absolutely.
He doesn't know about Ellie being infected at this stage. Ellie stabs the guard to get away, because she knows he'll find out.
But what I mean is that in this instance, Joel even doesn't know that's the point mm-hmm. where it changes, because of the reason why he did what he did at that moment to protect Ellie, with that kind of little memory or flashback of the night of the outbreak.
Yeah.
So even though he's not aware of it, it will still be antagonistic. Mm-hmm. There's that unconscious change in how he views her at the moment, and how that, I guess, infects him moving forward in terms of how their relationship alters. She'll always be antagonistic. She'll always riff on him, because, like you say, that's what she does. And that's one of the great things about Ellie.
Absolutely. And I love her little antagonistic jab at her in this episode. That moment where she breaks the code that he has between Joel and Bill and Frank, these messages that they send back and forth to each other as through songs from the 60s, 70s and 80s, where a 60 songs means there's nothing new in, a 70 song means there is new stock, and then the 80s section is left blank, and she calls him on it. She pretends that there was a play of Wham's Wake Me Up Before You Go Go. 80s song, what does that mean? And she sees the shock on his face means danger. So, but she's winding him up because she wants to know what it is. So she's winding him up, showing that she's smart, showing that she's, that she's able to crack the code effectively. So, just by getting a rise out of him. So yeah, really enjoyed that. Really enjoyed these two together. And it's so essential for the story of this season that, I'm glad we came out of the episode with, two great main characters right there and some fantastic supporting characters.
Yeah,
definitely.
No, 100%.
That's our major points from the episode. Anything else we want to call out about the episode that we may not have touched on?
For me, there's a load of Easter eggs that I think like a lot of them are going to be mostly just for gamers or people who have played the game. So, for example, like the film is a rip from their favorite film in the game,
right?
Being a poster on the wall. The T-shirt that Sarah is wearing is a band, and on the back has a lot of tour dates, and all the tour dates are literally the order of where they go in the game, including one or two more, which we assume they might show actually in the show.
Oh, very good, because that's the T-shirt is the same T-shirt. The band is the same T-shirt that Sarah in the game's wearing. So
yes,
yeah, which is very cool.
So it's just nice little nods to that.
Yeah.
So I get the feeling a lot of it is going to be, if you have played the games, you will enjoy this.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna go, oh my god, that's. But like I think it's all going to be just for that. But for anyone who hasn't, we'll call out one or two of them in the future as we go through. But I don't want to get too deep into it because some of it just is like. It's just like, hey, if you played it, here's a nod. There you go, quick.
Yeah.
So we'll call it one or two. A really cute one is in the TV show they recreated her desk exactly as it was in her in the video game. So one of the actual environmental artists on Twitter in Naughty Dog shared the photo going, oh my god, they included the fun little card of the dinosaur that she bought for her dad in it too. That you could see.
Yeah.
And it's literally a blink and you'll miss it. A recreation of something that you could interact with, the card. And they don't even show it in the TV show. They just put it on the desk.
Yeah.
So it's one of these, like, it's going to be literally Easter egg hunting for people who've played the game.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I love that they're putting in these nods. You know, and again, you'd expect that with Neil Druckmann being involved and being the creator of the games, Craig Mazin being such a big fan of the games. That's how they met and how they collaborated together on the project, was because two of them were fans of each other, effectively. So it's great that they have those nods. One of the choices that they made for the show, and it's not an Easter egg, it's just a great choice that they made for the show, is continuing to include the music from the game by Gustavo Santaolalla, who is the composer for the music, because so many times when you're waiting for that game to load up, you hear the beautiful chords that he plays in what is now the opening theme for the show. Like anybody who would have sat waiting for the game to load will have heard that beautiful music, and it's great that they kept it because it's the right.
Yeah, exactly. It's even the warning, version of that music, like in 2003 with just the shaking hand and the reflecting bracelet on Sarah's face, and with the gram in the antlers, and just the dark tone coming into that music as well.
Absolutely.
The only note I've got is, we do see the final stage of an infected here as Tess and Joel make their way sort of through their secret routes towards the Firefly headquarters, where effectively all the fungus has finally sort of just mushroomed out of the infected person, and they're kind of just held there against the wall. Again, straight out of the video game as well, and we see that, but effectively that's where the fungal infection has expired their host, and they're dead.
And you can kind of see from Tess, this is a very rare thing. It would be very rare that you would see an infected get to that stage, because she's completely shocked by it. She knows what it is, of course, but it's very rare that it happens. I suppose because they probably clear out the area near to the quarantine zone pretty regularly.
Yeah.
I was interested to hear Joel say that they only had been outside. It would have been a year since they'd been outside.
Yeah.
Given that he's a smuggler, and given that that they go in and out, I would have thought a bit more often, so that they can pick up supplies to smuggle and sell inside. I thought they had been out more often than that, but it was interesting to hear it's been a year.
It might be more the official supply routes that are coming in. He is skimming off that, or he's got people involved in that, so that he doesn't have to go out into the dangerous outside world.
Well, yeah. Yeah. Also love the visual of the fallen skyscraper, in the city of Boston, at the end of the episode. I thought that was so cool, seeing the one skyscraper broken in half, leaning up against another standing skyscraper. A really iconic, closing image for the episode as well.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. One other one. Just a nod to another epidemic, that's going on. Did you notice that what they were trading for, are opioids? That's what Joel is taking, and that's what the guard is taking, are opioids. So when he talks about oxy or hydro, he's talking about opioids. So the opioid epidemic has not stopped, even 20 years after where we are right now. So,
well, that's true. I mean, it just shows you, when you're trying to escape, if you've got to do it, I guess we'd all be on it in an apocalyptic world. Use
some over the counter drugs and or prescription drugs and whiskey, and you'll get through any pandemic, apparently.
Or maybe ecstasy from the fungus. Maybe there's and psilocybin and so on.
If the outbreak had happened in 1995, everybody'd be on ecstasy, I guess.
It's just a big rave inside.
Exactly.
Everyone's just like, is it all right? Yeah, they're just no one has any lips from chewing them all off.
Everyone's got glow sticks going.
Yeah, although that might pass the fungal infection, unfortunately, a bit faster. As a music fan, I was wondering what would be the 90s. What would the 90s songs mean? I was a little disappointed because it's 2003 that it took place. Of course, the Billboard Top 100 Hits book should cover all of the 90s as well, right? So if the 80s is danger, what's the 90s? That's all that went through my head.
The end. Yeah,
it was the end of music, and it's the end of
yeah, it reached its pinnacle in the 90s, I guess. So that's probably
Backstreet Boys. Backstreet's back.
God, you had to pick my least favorite of all of the boy bands, didn't you, Chris?
I know, that was literally like,
right.
I was going to say Kylie Minogue,
but she started in the 80s, so she would probably be.
She should be so lucky to be the end of days.
There you go. Well, I think that's a very good point to finish our discussion on The Last of Us episode 1. Overall, what did you think of the first episode? I think we pretty positive on it. Chris, what did you think overall?
I loved it. Again, as someone who has played the beginning of this game multiple times, I really need to finish.
Does that mean you die a lot, or that the game gets worse as it goes on?
It was, when it first came out, it was not that great, and it was a beautiful story. Just control wise, I didn't click, and I've tried it multiple times, I still haven't clicked. So I'm gonna do this and then watch this show and then play it.
Hey, can I be honest?
Yeah.
When we played the remastered version of this game a couple of weeks ago, we started a couple of weeks ago. We're about 3/4 of the way through the playthrough at the moment. The scene where Joel and Sarah are walking down to the army guy in the episode here. I got shot in that scene as Joel and died, and then had to start the scene again. Right, so it's one of those ones where you're not paying attention. Sometimes you can just look at a stray bullet and die. That does happen in the game, and this is how games work. So sometimes that happens, but we have finished the game a few times. So,
or you panic uncontrollably when
what do I do?
when there are fungus infected people charging at you.
Uh-huh.
And so you just run.
Yes.
Yeah. No. Sometimes I just run a lot in circles.
Can't catch me.
Exactly.
Overall, look, I really enjoyed this. I think I knew what was coming, but I loved how they put it together. Craig Mason is fantastic for focusing on what should be focused on, but giving everything else in the background in out of focus or in unique ways, without having a character coming in like Basil Exposition, just giving a narrative drop and then walking away. We got everything we needed up to where we're going, and literally beyond that. So I'm just excited. And I know it's a long episode. It's a long episode one. It's an hour 20. I know the remainder, like 55 to 60 plus, kind of going in, and we've got another 8. I'm so excited to see how they can then say 15, 20 hour, let's say somewhere between that. You could say 15-hour narrative into the space of that shorter period. Yeah. I really want to see how that. I know because this game is old and being a very, very much in the gaming ecosystem, I know how it ends. I know all the backstory because also I follow the actors who portrayed these characters originally in the game, and I know their stories and they talk about it. And Neil Druckmann, I'm really in that. So I'm now more interested to see this adaptation and what they make different. Without knowing the beat for beat, I know the major points. Yeah. So now I get to experience this as if I was wholly new, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Excellent. And I'm excited to see what you think of the rest of the story that's told over the course of the other episodes. Kind of feel like I know where the show is going to land at the end of season 1, but the journey to get there is going to be really interesting. I think it feels like it's in safe hands at the moment. How about yourself, John? What overall, what do you think of the episode?
Yep, I absolutely love this. I give this 5 mushrooms on toast out of 5. I'm so pleased that Craig Mazin is involved. I really enjoy his sensibilities in terms of the direction. Yeah, I mean, Chernobyl I loved. I thought it was gripping. Yeah. And I found this gripping. I found the whole, the prologue, I thought really a nice little bit of difference from the game. I mean, yes, the game storyline is good. This for me will condense it into sort of a more closed timeline for me rather than me expanding it out. So it's just got that level of urgency as well. To it. I thought the prologue was really good. I just thought the whole, section around in 2003 with the outbreak and just building up to that was just so cleverly done. In terms of delivering that big moment of the death of Sarah, which is, a big moment. I mean, for me, I love other zombie, shows. I really enjoy The Walking Dead. For me, it probably outstayed its welcome on TV. I was never as excited, certainly towards the latter part, unlike yourself, Derek. But, so I like how this is different in that it's not dealing with zombies. That whole, for anyone thinking that this is The Walking Dead,
it's not.
No, it's not. But what I mean is that death of Sarah at the start means, there's a different dynamic to the central person here. And I love how you see him broken down 20 years later and this new society really kind of hemmed in and confined by this outbreak. I just thought atmospherically it was great. I loved the subtleness of some of the shots in terms of with the that initial convulsing from Granny Adler. I thought was just spectacular. There's a moment as they're going through the no man's land bit, as they're leaving the quarantine zone in Boston, where there's just this capture of light as they're going through one of the big pipes of Tess's face in the light. And you see Ellie kind of really, taking her lead, sort of being a little bit afraid of what they're doing. I just thought it was so well done. I loved Tess, and I think Anna Torv, just superb. I think when you think of John Hannah and Nico Parker, who plays Sarah, I think got some really good actors here for either just some very small appearances like John Hannah's, or, ones that have to deliver something really meaningful, but because of the nature of the world in which they live, which is dangerous and threatening, are likely to die. And it's really interesting to see how fantastic these actors are doing to bring so much depth.
Yeah.
So I absolutely loved this from start to finish. So for me, it's 5 mushrooms on toast out of 5. Yeah, absolutely loved it.
Excellent.
Tasty.
I'll also have to give a bit of a shout out to Merle Dandridge. Great to see her reprising her role of Marlene from the game. It's so surreal to see her because the game is so accurate in how it captures the characters in motion capture that you really see her face, the same face that you've seen in the game, which you don't see with any other of the other actors or characters. So it was kind of cool to see her on screen there as well. Excellent. Glad we all enjoyed this one. Looking forward to the next episode of the show. But we have our first question in our World's End pub quiz for The Last of Us coming up. As I mentioned earlier on, there will be 9 questions over the course of this season of The Last of Us. All you need to do is put together the answers for each of those questions and email us to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com for your chance to get your hands on The Last of Us Part 1 for PlayStation 5 or PC. The PC version comes out in March when the series ends, so perfect timing for you to enter the competition to win that. If you want to add an extra entry, if you want to add an extra chance to get your hands on it, you can also rate us on Apple Podcasts and send us an email with your details of that rating, and we will pop you into the hat as well.
Excellent stuff.
So, John, do you want to give us the first question in The Last of Us World's End pub quiz?
Yes, fellow survivors, grab your glass or jam jar of moonshine in this and be prepared for your tonsils to be burnt off by the raw alcohol at the World's End pub quiz. Question 1, which is for 3 points. There are 3 elements to the answer here. Question 1. FEDRA have identified 3 periods to full infection taking hold. How long does it take for someone bitten on the neck, the torso, and the foot to become fully infected?
I love this. I was resistant to having this as our question because The Walking Dead, as an example, never put timelines on what happens after someone gets bitten and how long it takes to infection. So I was really loving seeing this in the show, and I wanted to call it out as a cool point. But we've saved it for a question, so hopefully you saw that in the episode. John, do you want to give the question one more time?
Yes. FEDRA have identified 3 periods to full infection taking hold. How long does it take for someone bitten on the neck, the torso, and the foot to become fully infected?
Good stuff. As we said at the end of the season, all you need to do is pop in your answers to us at feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com.
Yes, so keep your eyes peeled to the environment in the quarantine zone for the answer. I'll give you a little hint because, yes, it's in the environment as a piece of public safety information, I guess.
That's more than a hint.
I know it is, but I recognize you could blink and you could miss it.
For our regular fellow listeners and fellow survivors, John consistently gives out to me for giving out clues, and because I didn't give out a clue, he's decided to give almost pointed out. Do you want to give this minutes and seconds? It was in the episode. I'm joking. No. I'm joking. No, we hope we get lots of entries for this because it's a pretty good prize too.
It is, absolutely.
Yeah, good stuff.
But you've got to work for it, fellow survivors. Like, I guess, anyone who has survived the apocalypse.
Exactly.
But gentlemen, let's head on over to some feedback from our fellow survivors. But before we do, let's just give a quick shout out to those of us who have supported us on Patreon, and we want to especially thank Maria G, who helped support this podcast. Thank you.
Excellent stuff. Thank you, Maria G, for your support. Really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Maria, for your support, and thanks to everybody that supports us over on Patreon.
Absolutely.
Yes, and if you want to be like Maria, you can head on to patreon.com/tvpodcastindustries, where you can support us for any credit amount, like the guys in The Last of Us. Yes, you can support us by choosing any amount on an ongoing monthly basis, and that will come straight in and help keep the lights on, the podcasters going, and essentially just keep the servers and the website in a state of energy. You know, it helps. It really does, every little bit. But if you want to just give a quick one-off donation, why not head on over to buymeacoffee.com/TVPI, where you can keep our editor-in-chief, the wondrous Derek, in caffeine. We actually use Buy Me a Coffee by buying him coffee and sometimes red wine, sometimes moonshine, deep into the wee hours as he edits away.
Sometimes mushroom vol au vents.
Yes. Oh my God,
Sometimes just mushrooms, given how much editing I'm doing, to be honest.
But as well, if you ain't got any credits, don't worry. We appreciate any support you can. You can like, share, subscribe, and more importantly, share the podcast with all your friends, families, your grannies, and even that granny that sits in the corner and twitches before she runs after you. Because sharing the podcast is what, gentlemen?
Sharing the love.
Sharing the love and the spores.
Yes,
Sharing
the
the
spores
spores.
with that granny.
Sharing the spores, exactly.
Excellent stuff.
Good stuff,
Gentlemen,
yes.
should we get some feedback?
Absolutely. Let's get over to Facebook for some feedback from our wonderful fellow survivors. First up, Victor Von Doom says, another home run for HBO. I was totally impressed with the acting and storytelling in this episode. I was so happy to see Anna Torv because I loved her in Fringe. Nico Parker and Bella Ramsey certainly have bright acting careers ahead of them. I live in an Xbox household though, so I pre-ordered the PC version of this game. Can't wait to play it. Ooh, maybe Victor needs to cancel his pre-order and enter our end of the world pub quiz. What do you think?
Well, absolutely. There's a thought, Victor.
Yeah.
You're now in a dilemma, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Keep your pre-order just in case you don't get it.
Yeah.
But hey, you might not have to get it. There you go. Good stuff. Glad you enjoyed it, Victor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely with you around Anna Torv. Loved her in Fringe as well. And yeah, I mean, these two young actors in Nico Parker and Bella Ramsey, just superb. You know, there's a lot of expectation, and certainly when you've seen them in previous stuff, certainly with regards to Bella Ramsey,
I think every single Game of Thrones fan loves Bella Ramsey for a couple of episodes on that show.
Definitely. So, absolutely really pleased, with the mark that they made in this episode.
Mm.
Excellent. Yes, thank you so much, Victor. Appreciate the feedback. Next up, we have some feedback from Wendy Ott Eppers, who had this to say. Loved it. The infected look wicked cool. Their creepy sharp movements and the fungus coming out of their mouths. What? Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But I did say the fungus looked tasty. Again, put it on some toast, just
You thought it looked
sauteed.
tasty? I thought it was like docking with her daughter that she was eating, like dropping into her neck. It was like worms falling into the other person to infect them. It looked cool, but not tasty.
It looked really cool. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Wendy.
Yeah, thanks,
Great to
Wendy.
hear from you.
We also got some feedback in from Mindy Megan, who says, the monsters infected are giving me big Annihilation vibes. I wonder if there's any visual FX connections there. I think the biggest visual reference that stood out to me was the fungus wall soldier who'd grown into the wall of the pool. Both images are so creepy and beautiful. Yeah, it's really, it is creepy. I mean, there's almost, for me as well, Hannibal vibes, off this, where he effectively plants the corpses in the mushroom beds for all the fungus to grow out of the bodies.
Yes, one of the killers did that. That went back in, that's season 1 or season 2 of episode 1 of Hannibal.
Yeah.
Our first show that we ever covered as TV Podcast Industries, John.
Yeah, exactly. But totally can see that connection between that the infected in Last of Us and that infected soldier on the wall in Annihilation as well.
Yeah, Mindy's kindly sent us some images from Annihilation, and comparing it to The Last of Us, it does look really interesting, doesn't it? Yeah, Annihilation, the Alex Garland movie. I know the designs in that are obviously very different overall, but I can totally see what you mean by that, Mindy.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely. Our final piece of feedback comes from Richard Blaze. Wow. I mentioned previously I'm not a huge fan of the games, having only played them for a few hours, but this show looks like it's going to be the next massive thing.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing a little of the story helped somewhat, but to be fair, the whole setup and extended opening, different from the game, felt like they wanted to focus on quality storytelling and believable characters, something this had in abundance. Loved it. Yep, pretty much agree with you right there, Rich. Like, it's exactly like giving it all those extra breathing room for the first kind of making an extra 20 minutes long. And something you probably only do in some of these HBO and or streaming, just gives it that character-driven setup.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Do you know, one final fascinating story? I'm really sorry. I just thought it was great. I've been looking at all the behind the scenes stuff this week. Did you know that originally Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann came to it thinking that the episode was going to end with Joel putting the body into the fire of the kid 20 years later? That's how they were going to end this episode of the show. There wasn't going to be any introduction of Ellie, no Tess, nothing like that in the episode. And the guys at HBO went, if you did that, you would basically have the death of Sarah, followed by the burning of a child, and then go to credits. People need a little reason to come back next week. We know it's bleak. We know there's going to be bleak moments in the story, but doing those two things back to back and then ending the episode would mean people wouldn't come back next week. Do you know what? HBO executives, good job.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Every now and again, you gotta say, well done, executives.
HBO genuinely tend to get it right more often than not, it seems. Yeah. So, yeah, really, really interesting. Great stuff, Richard. Glad you're enjoying it. We have a voicemail in for this episode from the wonderful Mr. Steve Brown.
As long as he's not clicking down the other end, I don't mind.
He's not, I promise. Here you go. Thanks, Steve.
Hello, TV podcast industries. This is Steve, and this is for The Last of Us, episode 1. I've only watched it once, so I need to really watch it again. I was underwhelmed by it. I mean, the acting was good. The writing was good. The cold open from 1968 to 2003, all that had me really, really intrigued. But then the 20-year jump just jarred me. Like, don't get me wrong. I was emotionally affected by, Joel losing his daughter there. But then, 20 years later, we see him again, and I don't know. I don't know. I was a bit underwhelmed by it. That's the only word I can say. I'm going to keep watching and definitely keep sending in some feedback. But as a non-game player, maybe that's why this didn't hit me as strongly as other people. I guess people said that the first 30 minutes of the game really hit them emotionally. It was emotional to see him lose his daughter, but then 20 years later, don't get me, again, I don't want to say it's wrong for him to still be grieving and mad about that. But anyway, so I'm going to press on, and hopefully it'll impress me some more. All right. Talk to you later.
Good stuff. Thanks, Steve, for your thoughts there. Really interesting to hear your thoughts, especially as a non-gamer. It's interesting. We were talking beforehand, this game has only ever been on the PlayStation, so they're even gamers, lots of them won't have ever even had the opportunity to play the game, and it may not have, hit with some people, exactly as Chris said, he only got through basically what's in these first 2 episodes and didn't get any more of the story, didn't get any more delivery to him of the story. So I'm hoping that it's working really well for people that haven't heard the story or haven't seen the story before, and the opening half hour of the game that people always say they're affected by is just to the death of Sarah, and that shot across the bow to you as a gamer is exactly as you see in the episode 20 years later. You've just played half an hour of a game, been really emotionally affected by what's going on, and then it cuts and you don't know what's happened to Joel. You don't get the impact other than him with his daughter dead in front of him. You learn that as the rest of the story goes along, what the actual impact has been on him and how much his life has changed. So it is a real gut punch, when you're playing it as a game. And I think the gut punch for me definitely comes across in the same way in the show, but let's see if the rest of the story plays out as well as it does in the game as well. I don't think it's lauded as a game just because of those opening 30 minutes. They are really affecting, but the rest of the game also has lots more of interesting characters that we meet and interesting storylines and interesting paths to go down as the series goes on as well. So hopefully the rest of it will hit you a bit closer, Steve.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing in that 20-year break, it's not Joel, it's the outcome of the grief and how it's changed him.
Yeah.
And I guess the reality of the new world and, you know, I get the approach is to do that time jump so that you see the broken society.
Absolutely.
Or the changes that have been enforced because of this, this outbreak. So I think it, you know, as we were chatting, on our points, it's changed him. That moment has changed him.
Yeah.
And he's a more broken or cynical, or angry person as a result of it.
Yeah, but also processing the grief over the course of 20 years as the world collapses around you changes you in a different way than it would if it had just been a 20-year time shift. You know, we talked about FEDRA being really brutal now, but remember, they've done 20 years of people walking to their doors saying they're safe, and they've probably seen the impact of not killing someone that has been infected. They've probably seen the impact of that. So they are, while they look really brutal to us because we've just jumped the 20 years in time, they've probably started out quite lenient and gotten more and more brutal as those 20 years got on. And that's what I love about this storytelling, this idea that they've just done black screen 20 years later, and now you got to catch up on why people are the way they are and how the world has changed. I love that.
Well, it's even Tess mentions that with the two kids that have beaten her up, Robert, that you know, they were teenagers, so they don't know how to discuss. It's always fist first or violence first because this world necessitates it.
They were born after the outbreak,
you know, because they were, exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of a really interesting take, is that, you know, there are pre and post outbreak, you know, characteristics here because it's a changed world. There's new reality. It's not spa time. It's hammer time, effectively, because you've got to look after and survive. It's a survival situation.
Yes, it's wrench time, I think.
Yeah, that's better.
There you go. Good stuff. Thanks so much, Steve, for your voicemail. If anybody wants to send us in a voicemail, you can just record it and email it to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com. You can also record a voicemail on our website. Just go to tvpodcastindustries.com. There's a button there where you can record up to 90 seconds of your feedback as well. You can also join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/TV Podcast Industries, where you can share your thoughts on the spoiler post on there for The Last of Us each week. And not only are we covering The Last of Us for a bit of levity, particularly this week, we are also covering Star Wars The Bad Batch every week. That show comes out on Wednesdays, and our podcast is on our main feed on TV Podcast Industries. So just search TV Podcast Industries wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can get all of our coverage from The Last of Us to The Bad Batch. There you go. We like to cover all bases on our show. Yeah. We'll be back next week with our next discussion about The Last of Us Episode 2, Infected, which releases on HBO Max on the 22nd of January and on Sky Atlantic outside of North America on the 23rd of January.
Yes.
Only a couple hours behind you.
Americans getting that extra 24 hours. Damn you.
I know.
Well, if we didn't have jobs, it comes out exactly the same time on Sky Atlantic as it does on HBO in the US. So it would be
2 a.m.
3 a.m. our time, I think, or 2 a.m. our time. Yep. So we're probably not going to do that unless we have a couple of bank holidays between now and the end of the series. We might do it then.
We could watch it after the Super Bowl.
There
exactly.
you go.
Literally watch the Super Bowl and then go straight into HBO and then kind of record, and we would be really bleary-eyed.
Yes.
Absolutely.
You know, we booked our day off for Super Bowl, so I think I'm going to do that. Excellent. But that's coming up later in the season. You might get our bleary-eyed thoughts after a Super Bowl and The Last of Us later on this season. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode. We hope you stay with us for the rest of the season.
Yes, thank you so much. I'll speak to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, fellow survivors, for joining us for our discussion of The Last of Us Episode 1. We'll see you next week, but in the meantime, keep watching, keep listening, and keep...
Bye.
Bye.